So my name is Arthur Sabinstev. I'm one of the lead iOS developers at the Washington Post, and I'm an open source software developer. And I'm here today to talk about open source software development with you because I'm under the belief that not enough people contribute to OSS. And I'm hoping that with this talk I can convince many of you, it doesn't matter what skill level you are, what your background is, that you have something to offer. So before we get into the meat of the talk, I feel like I should define what open source software is. I'm pretty sure everyone in here knows about what exactly OSS is, but just for the sake of completeness, open source software is software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance, and obviously you can also monetize on that code without having to pay royalties to the creators or maintainers of the code base. There's also some confusion online on what open source software is or free software is, because the word free in the English language has two meanings. It's free as in free speech and free as in free beer. A lot of people assume that open source software is free as in free beer, which is wrong. So what's the difference? Free as in free speech or liberty is software like this. It's inspect, modify, enhance, monetize other people's work. And free as in free beer is software you get for free, such as Adobe Flash Player or Adobe Acrobat, and for many of us at some point in our lives, the Pirate Bay edition of Adobe Photoshop could be considered to be free as in free beer software. So I'll take another sec, so a lot of people still walking in. Awesome. Full house. So, perfect. So with a show of hands, now that everyone knows what open source software is, because it's up here in black and white, how many of you contributed to OSS at least once in your life? How many of you do it on a weekly basis? Come on. Not even one hand. All right, well hopefully after this, I can get you all moving, at least for maybe a month or two. You can do it every single week. So, you're about to give me 40 minutes of your time, so I figure I at least should prove to you that I know something about this subject. So within the Swift and iOS and Objective-C communities, let's just say the Apple communities, excluding macOS, I have my CocoaPods have been downloaded over 1.3 million times. I have 7,200 stars on GitHub on my own personal projects. I've contributed to Swift. I also have a library that's part of the Swift Source Compatibility Suite. I also wrote a Swift command line script to keep track of how well my projects are doing. It is also open source. It is called GitFame. It is self-indulgent, but it's free. And you can find it on my GitHub, which is at the bottom of every slide. So if you want, follow me or tweet at me or whatever on Twitter and GitHub. And these slides are also available on GitHub, and I have like 20 footnotes for everything that I reference or list, so you'll be able to go back and find everything that you want. So this is me. I spend an inordinate amount of my free time doing this for the last 5 or 6 years. And one thing that I want to start with, and again, I'm trying to target all developers here, all skill levels. So a little bit about me. I don't have a computer science degree. I have 2 degrees in physics. I dropped out of a PhD program. I've been doing this. I've been doing iOS development for 6 years. I've been doing open source development for 5 years because I had and I still have imposter syndrome. I feel like I need to prove myself over and over again, and I don't know how to relax. So every time I finish a project, I get another bug or two that gets into my head, and I feel like I need to go do something. So I am someone that has contributed a great amount to open source software development. I do not have the pedigree that I would myself have considered other people need to have to contribute to OSS. Just having an idea and putting the code out there will begin your journey of becoming a better developer. Why? Because if your product or your project rather is something that is of interest, other people will come and contribute and critique your code for you, or start submitting some pull requests or issues to help your project get to where its inevitable goal is, assuming that you have built something that is worth using. So that leads me to the different types of open source projects that exist. So there are 4 types of open source projects. And this is a slide that I have paraphrased from Felix Krause. He is the creator of Fastlane that is now owned by Google, formerly owned by Twitter. And he did a talk at TriSwift, I think earlier this year, where he delineates 4 levels of open source projects. So there's a project with no adoption. And a project that has absolutely no adoption is, this is the open source talk for anyone that's coming in. So the 4 levels of projects, the first one is a project that has no adoption. So that's, on GitHub, those are projects that people just uploaded the code once, have never gone back to it, or no separate entity or new person has come on the project and contributed anything to it. So it's just taking up space, kind of, how to think about it. Or it's something that may be actively maintained by the individual that wrote the project, but no one has actually found it or used it. But there's an individual that is actually actively working on it, but there's no community adoption yet. So the flip side of that is a project that has adoption. So what is a project that has adoption? Pretty much the opposite of point number one. Something with at least one or more individuals who are not part of the original creation of this project, who have come in for any reason to begin contributing to the project, either critiquing it, adding tests, hooking up CI, hooking up third-party tools, adding features, bugs, and so on. So pretty much this should cover everything, but that's not true. There are two more levels of projects. That next is the gold standard. So that is a specific project that is the community accepted solution for a very specific problem. So if I were to ask everyone in here, what is the quintessential networking library in Objective-C and Swift for all iOS projects? Everyone in here would say AF Networking or Alamo-Fire. Even if you don't use it, when you think about networking, you think about third-party libraries, Alamo-Fire is the project that always comes to mind. That is an example of a gold standard project. And a hyperscale project does not necessarily have to be a gold standard project. What a hyperscale project is a project that is so large that there's at least one or more full-time employees working on the project. So whatever institution maintains the project, they actually pay individuals real green dollars or euros or whatever it is that you want to maintain said project. Think about Swift, right? Apple pays a whole team a whole team of engineers, a lot of dollars to maintain this project for the community. So they indirectly benefit from doing that. Realm does the same thing, right? They make money off of service and support. Fastlane, same thing at Google. And there's a million more projects like this. So in my career, I've had the fortune of creating projects that have had adoption, and I have a couple projects that are considered to be the gold standard of the specific problem that they solve. And I've also had the ability to contribute to hyperscale projects. So later through my talk, I'll get into what this is. But I want to start back when I was a junior developer. I want to go back into the past to a time before everyone was making a JSON parsing library. So that was probably in the last year, right? And so what I did with the slides is I'll list a few different libraries, and I'm going to have you guys guess what it is, like what my first library was. But these libraries that I mentioned here are the ones that came to mind. So these are libraries I remember. I'm not sure if these are the quintessential libraries representing JSON parsing, but this is what I remember from the internet, from reading on the web, and this is what got stuck in my head. Before JSON parsing libraries, there were syntactic sugar auto layout libraries. And while I have the floor, in the holy war that is storyboards versus programmatic auto layout, I fall into the storyboard category, so I don't use these, because I can't. But that's my one that you can hate me if you want. We can talk about it after. But anyway, these are the libraries that always stick out. And also masonry. I forgot to put masonry up there. For auto layout libraries. And before that, going way back in the past now, everyone wanted to make an asynchronous image downloading library. This is back in the beginning of the decade. So the two libraries I remember, it's kind of funny that I remember these two. So Kingfisher is, in my mind, the quintessential Swift library, but it only came out a couple years ago. SD WebImage is the library. It came out in 2009. It's still maintained. It's still being used. It is a working Objective-C library. It is the old as gold methodology. But if you want a pure Swift project, I would suggest using Kingfisher. So, now that I went this far back, you don't actually have to say out loud, but in your mind, think about what types of libraries people were building back at the turn of the decade. What do you think my first open source library was? All right? Raise your hand if you guessed pull to refresh. Not one person. Okay. So, for those of you who are fairly new, pull to refresh was a gesture that didn't always exist in the iOS and Android frameworks. Pull to refresh was actually created by an indie developer named Lauren Richter. He created the Tweety iOS and Mac apps, and in Tweety 2, he introduced the pull to refresh gesture, and Twitter acquired him and the Tweety app, and they turned that into the first version of the official iOS Twitter client. And then they patented pull to refresh, and then they open sourced the patent, and that's why pull to refresh appeared in the iOS SDK in iOS 6 in 2012. So there's a little history lesson for you. I did not want to build a pull to refresh library, but my favorite library back then, which was 320, if anyone remembers that library, supported pull to refresh, but somewhere in the middle of 2012, they decided to deprecate the library. And at the time, I was working in an agency, and I was working, and by the way, sorry, I should say this, 320 is a UI components library, was a UI components library that came out around iOS 3 or iOS 4 that introduced a bunch of components that did not exist, like gallery views, swipeable gallery views, collection style views, drop-in clones of the mail app, compose message view, custom buttons, and pull to refresh. But anyway, I've digressed. Somewhere in early 2012, they deprecated the library. And at that time, I was about 7 months into my career. I was working for an agency in New York that was fortunate enough to gain two brand clients, Porsche and Ducati. And the way this worked is there was an agency named Fantasy Interactive, or FI, still around to this day. They had built a platform, a social networking platform for brands, and these were two of their clients. And they hired my agency that I worked at the time, Fueled, which is also still a company in New York, to build out very similar white-labeled apps, social networking apps. So if you look at the screen, I'm not sure if you can see it, there's 9 buttons on the home screen. 6 of them lead to table views with custom data sources, and since pull to refresh was this hot thing back then, the client asked for a manual pull to refresh on each table view controller. And at the time, again, 6 or 7 months into my career, I was like, oh man, 320 is deprecated, but I'm working on these 2 apps that are going to be around forever, which they weren't. And I need to write code that needs to be made, we need to use a library that's going to be maintained for years to come. So why don't I look online and see what else I can find? So I look online and I come across Ego Table View Refresh Controller, if anyone remembers that one, and then there was a few others, but all of them were like in disrepair. No one wanted to maintain this because 320 was it. It was like the best implementation of the gesture. So I decided to build my own. So I found one that was in disrepair. It was by an engineer named Leah Culver. It was called Pull to Refresh. It was a really easy to follow library. I forked it. I learned what forking was. Remember, I was learning Git at the same time I was learning iOS development. I forked it and I rewrote it to be compatible with iOS 5, and I added a couple more features, and I did this all in my free time. And there's a point to me saying that, because there's 2 lessons that I learned by building this library and integrating it into this app. First lesson I learned is that we're all blacksmiths, right? We are one of the few vocations in the history of man where we can create our own tools to solve our own problems. We all know this, but we don't think about this actively. If we have a problem, we always are like, let's see if someone else solved it. But we can do that ourselves, right? And once you start thinking this way, you feel like you have this, superpower. When you're like, oh, cool, I can do this myself. But with certain problems, you actually follow through on saying that, right? So people here, right now, there are a bunch of, there's a lot of apps that, let's say, I don't even know if I want to go down this route. Let's just say this. When it comes to open source code, you usually want to write something small and something reusable because it's something you can maintain. So if you start thinking like you're a blacksmith or a mathematician, right? Mathematicians also create new tools whenever they can't solve their own problems. You will kind of change your brain chemistry a bit, because every problem you start solving, or coming across, you're going to be like, oh, wait, I can put this online. Someone else might find this useful. That's literally the first thought I have, and then I have to think about how much time it's going to take out of my life to maintain said project. But what it comes down to is I now start thinking this way because I've done it at least once in my life, right? I had this pull to refresh library in a time where I felt like it was needed, and it wasn't. Unfortunately, no one really used it. But the other thing I learned, and this I think is more important than any coding skill or any thought process I learned, is gumption, right? Junior developer, don't have the comp sci pedigree. At my first job, built something in my free time. And so let's say, I don't remember exactly the timeline, but let's say on Thursday I found out that 320 was being deprecated. Monday morning I had a new library out, showed my lead developer on my team, my manager, and he was like through the roof thrilled that we had an in-house solution that worked, that was reusable, built with dry principles and highly encapsulated, yada yada yada. And it gave me a boost of confidence that I needed. I'm 7 months into a job. I quit my whole life. My whole life plan was to do this, and here I'm going out on a limb. No one asked me to spend my free time building this library. I built it. My engineer's happy with me. They integrated into these 2 libraries, so now I have open source code in 2 big apps, or what I thought were going to be big apps, which they were not. And it gave me this boost of confidence that I needed, and gave me the ability to, it kind of unlocked this chain where I'm like, yeah, I can contribute to open source. I may not write the best code yet, but it makes me think, I start thinking about how other people are going to use my code, right? So I start thinking about what actually needs to be exposed in the interface. How do I need to abstract this? Do I need to expose these constants or not? Or do I even need constants here? Blah, blah, blah. What features will other people need? So the 2 skills I learned here is I can build anything I want by myself if the project is small enough and I feel like the solution is necessary enough. And the other thing I learned is I gain confidence just by going out on a limb and doing something. Open source enabled that for me. And again, this was to fight my imposter syndrome. But that's, by the way, the last top slide that's kind of aimed at a junior developer or someone that's out of a code school or that's someone that's a new iOS developer. I kind of just want to put it out there for you to make sure that everyone is welcome in this talk. So the next thing I want to do is cover a couple more projects that I've worked on and why I decided to build what I built and what I learned in the process. So has everyone seen the float label pattern? Show of hands. Okay, for those of you who have not, what the float label pattern is if you look right now, the placeholder moves above the text field or the text view once you fill in once the user populates the text field or text view with content. This was a pattern invented by Matt D. Smith. He put it up on Dribble and it took the UX world by storm back then, the mobile UX world by storm in 2013, I think. And people started building libraries. So the first library that was ever built was by an engineer by the name of Jared Verdi. He built JV floating label text field, but it did not do everything I wanted it to do. First, it did not support text views. Second, if you look, I'll do it next time around, but watch closely. As the text disappears, all the letters animate one letter at a time in reverse order. That is not the actual functionality of the clear button. So watch, one letter at a time, right? Everyone saw that? I wanted to add that. So, and I also wanted to have some kind of special control, some special things I could do on UI menu controller as well, which is part of text fields and text views when you long press on those fields. So I had enough of my own features that I wanted to add, and he wasn't having it. He wouldn't accept my PR, so I just built my own library, right? If no one else wants your work, you do it yourself. So I built two of my own libraries, UI float label text field and UI float label text view. And yes, I know it's taboo to use the letters UI in your own custom work, but I didn't know any better in 2012. So what's the best way of building a text field that on the clear button actually animates everything out? You could either build your entire own UI control, you can build your own custom UI text field or text view, or you could swizzle a UI component. I knew jack all about swizzling, and I knew even less about swizzling UI components. So for those of you who don't know what swizzling is, it's a cool word, it's just to say. What swizzling is, it's the act of taking an implementation that you do not have access to, so anything like an UI kit or Foundation that you can't actually see, well, Foundation is now open source, but anything UI kit that you can't see, and swapping out whatever that implementation is for something else. So in this case, I wanted to access the clear button on UITextField and add my own method that would be called when you hit it on touch-up inside. So what I did is I learned how to access that button. The first thing you do is you need to guess what the name of that button is. So, though Apple is really bad, in my opinion, at naming actual hardware products, they're really good at naming, various controls inside of their UIKit. So, the actual name of the clear button inside of UITextField is clear button, camel case. So I guessed that, and I got that selector back. And from there, I referenced the getter for the clear button using the imp keyword. And from there, I used a function pointer to actually gain a reference to the button itself. From there, I learned how to remove, and this is something I didn't know back then, but everyone knows that a UI button has 1,000,001 different UI control events, but the only one that anyone really uses is UI touch-up inside, correct? That's the one everyone uses. But I don't know what Apple is doing under the hood for this button. They could have more than one control event program, so I wanted to find a way to remove all set events. So if you Google enough, you'll find out that you can do it in one line of code. So you set your target to nil, you set your action to null, and there's actually an enum control event called all events, which will remove all events for all targets forever, for all time. And then from there, I just added my own target to my own new implementation of the animating out function called clearTextField. And that's how you swizzle a UI component. So this is on UI flow label text field, which is available on GitHub. It is still maintained. It's an Objective-C. I am probably never going to port it to Swift because other people have already done it. But anyway, if you want to take a look, this is how you do it. And then another library. So I told you I contributed to Swift Source Compatibility Suite. So you don't have to contribute a cross-platform library to the Swift Source Compatibility Suite. You can contribute any library that you want. But I wanted to contribute a truly cross-platform, meaning it works on Darwin or Apple and Linux platforms. So to do that, I had a function that I needed to I had a very interesting function in this library that I built, and I should tell you what the library is. The library is called Guitar. It is a library that adds extra functionality to strings that don't exist on the string API, and the functions that it adds are useful for server-side Swift development. Mind you, I don't do server-side Swift development, but I want to do server-side Swift development, so I was looking to see what was missing in that community because I had too much free time one weekend. And I found out that there was no big string library like exists in other languages. So the quintessential one, I think, in the JavaScript community is called Voca. And then there's a few others that exist in other communities. So I took a few that I found that were well documented, and I did a one-to-one comparison of what functions exist that they created, and I went to see what exists on Swift and what doesn't. And then I added about 30 new functions, and I made a library out of it, and I ended up submitting to the source compatibility suite. And because this was the year in which they were doing the big string overhaul, they were really happy to get a library that they could test against. So source compatibility suite runs Swift versions of Swift against in their CI suite. The source compatibility suite has during the continuous integration process, when they integrate new versions of Swift, they run it against a bunch of libraries. Guitar is one of those libraries, and this one specifically works around strings. So the reason I mention this library is every line of code in here is essentially something new that I learned in building this library. So the function here is called Latinized, or in some languages it might be called Romanized. So what this specific function does is it takes a string that is written in multiple languages. So here I think it's the word hello written in Japanese, Turkish, Arabic, Chinese, and in English, and it then transliterates it into Latin characters, and then removes accents as well. There's an accent. So it pretty much gets the English version representation of all these letters, how you would phonetically pronounce them. So the first line of code in here, it says at discardable result. So that's a new keyword that was added in Swift 3, and you really almost never need to use this unless you're building an open source library, because there's almost no reason to do it. So what discardable result does is it silences a very specific warning. If you have a function that returns a specific type, but you decide that you don't want to store that type in a let or a var, your compiler will complain, right? So if you do something like mystring.latinize and you don't save it into a let or a var, the compiler will say, hey, this function returns a type, but you're not saving it. Do underscore equals mystring.latinized. Has anyone seen that before? Okay. Discardable result silences that warning, so it lets you just say mystring.latinize without having to store in a value. So cool little trick you learned there. Very useful when you have no idea who your consumer is, and sometimes they may just want to perform an operation without storing it just for the hell of it. Who knows? You have to think really abstractly and creatively sometimes. Next, the attribute or macro, I don't know what it's called anymore. OS. So what OS Linux or not, bang OS Linux means in this conditional control statement, target everything but Linux. So pretty much Darwin compatible libraries only. Then the next one is another attribute or macro called available, which lets you target the minimum version of any specific platform that you want. So in this case, the function that I'm going to use in the next line is only available on iOS 9, macOS 10.11, tvOS 9, and watchOS 3. And that is an applying transform function, which is a method, rather not a function, it's a method on the string library, and what it does, it actually does a transliteration. So applying transform to Latin, and you're done. That's also something I learned in the process. I had no idea this even existed on Swift. Now I know you can transliterate text. Again, something I learned because I wanted to build a library. And then assertion failure. So an assertion failure is essentially an assert that also throws a message. And if you don't know what an assert is a line of code that crashes only in debug mode. So pretty much in your sim or when your scheme is set to debug. So it's a good way when you're running tests to find out if your code is going to break. So again, there's like 5 different things I learned in this one little function that I wanted to write. So what's the lesson I wanted to impart on you here? And that lesson is, in your free time, building an open source library will let you learn and experiment with language and platform APIs that you wouldn't normally do in your day job. So if you want to take anything back from this talk, it's writing open source code, just getting a bug in your head for a specific idea will take you down uncharted paths. And you'll learn, like I showed you 2 examples. I learned 5 different APIs in Swift and on string, and I also learned how to swizzle a UI component just because I had an idea I could not shake. So if you ever want to get an open source and you want to just try something, you will enrich yourself in the process. So next, and this is the last set of projects I want to talk about that I worked on before I get into the part of the talk that tells you how you can get into open source software development and some tips and tricks about maintenance. I want to talk about two projects that I own. So there is a very specific problem that existed before iOS 7 came out. When developers threw out a new version of their app, there was no way to update. There was no way to tell your users in a nice, clean way that there's a new version to update their app without the user serendipitously going to the App Store, going to the Updates tab, and clicking Update. When iOS 7 came on, by default, Apple turned on automatic downloads. Unfortunately, automatic downloads sometimes take up to 72 hours to work. So there was still a need for a specific library that would prompt the user when a new version of the app was available. So I saw this need, and I built a library called Harpy in Objective-C that would present, the very basic version of this library, would present one of three types of alerts. An alert that would force the user to update their app so they could never use your app ever again unless they update the app. Or they'll give you the option to update next time you launch the app. Or they'll let you skip that option, skip this update entirely. This was all I wanted to do. This was my basic library. And I built this in Objective-C, and I built a version a couple years later in Swift called Siren. And over time, these have become the gold standard versions of the library. And I don't have much competition. I'm not saying there is competition. I like competition. I wasn't even first to the scene. There was a library that came out many years ago called iVersion by Nick Lockwood, but it's kind of not being worked on anymore. I just didn't like how anything in there was implemented. It was just a very different coding style than what I was used to. So I decided to do it myself because, I don't know, I'm just that type of person. I think everyone here is like, oh, someone already did it. Well, I could do it better. And that was kind of my, modus operandi. And I didn't think I was going to do it, but I ended up, if you look at all the stats, like all the GitHub stars, the forks, and all the stats in CocoaPods, these two libraries each beat iVersion by quite a lot. So combined, these two libraries have been downloaded 800,000 times. That doesn't mean that there are 800,000 apps using it. That just means there's a lot of CI that runs in the background doing pod update. Or pod itself. But anyway. So these are what these libraries do, but they actually do a lot more than I initially envisioned them to do. So I'm going to go briefly to tell you what I learned from maintaining Harpy for 5 years and Siren for 2.5 years now. So I learned a lot about package managers. When Harpy came on the scene, I was using Git submodules. CocoaPods was just becoming a thing. And I ended up getting, people ended up finding the Harpy library, and I'll get to how they found it later. And people started posting issues on saying, hey, it would be great if you had CocoaPod support. And I was like, what the F is CocoaPods? And then people explained to me what it was, so I learned a little bit of Ruby, I read the documentation, learned what a pod spec was and a pod file was and all this other stuff. And I added CocoaPod support. And then, obviously, Carthage came on the scene later because one dependency manager wasn't enough. And people were like, we want Carthage support. And I said, what the F is Carthage? And people told me exactly what it was, and I added Carthage support. And then, no one asked for Swift package manager support, but I did it anyway because I figured someone was going to come eventually and ask me, and I was just going to, beat to the punch and say, hey, I already support Swift. And I only actually had one person ever ask for Swift package manager support. They found a bug in my implementation of it because I had no idea if it was going to work or not. I didn't actually test it. I just followed the tutorial, and I thought it was going to work, and turned out that I was wrong, but someone called me out on it a year later, and I fixed it on another repo. It actually works on these other repositories. So, what I want to get across here is 2 points. First is these are all very opinionated. These make you structure your repository in a very specific way. So if you were to start an open source project today and you wanted to support all 3 package managers, which you should, this is how you would start. First, you would start with Swift Package Manager, and what Swift Package Manager makes you do is it makes you put all your source code in the top level directory in a folder called sources. You can drop everything in there, including your bundles if you have custom bundles. Then it makes you add a package.swift file at the top level directory where you add some metadata. Then I would ask you to add Carthage support, which is the biggest pain in the ass, sorry, because you have to create a sample project, you have to create a dynamic framework, you have to add all your source code symbolically linked to said dynamic framework, then create a scheme for said dynamic framework and for the app, then share those schemes and make sure you commit those schemes, so you have to change your git ignore file as well, to do all that into your project. And the reason I want you to do that after Swift Package Manager, because if you do it before, you have to then do it again because all of this has to be in the sources folder. So I added Swift Package Manager support after the fact, so I had to do Carthage support all over again. And then CocoaPods is the easiest because all you do is you add a pod spec file and you're done. And the pod spec file is just all your metadata. So in the process, I learned an inordinate amount about package manager support, and for a time, at a couple companies I worked with, I was the tools guy, especially the dependency manager guy, because I'll tell you this, when I first started working at the Washington Post a couple years ago, my first job was to fix the whole transitive dependency issue with mixed Swift and Objective-C frameworks. So we have our internal pod specs, we have our own internal libraries at the Post, and we have a lot of we had a lot of Objective-C libraries, and we had those depending on analytics frameworks, which were in Objective-C, and we had mixed repositories, and it turns out that there's this whole cluster cuck issue where just a horrible personal consider. It just reminds me of a lot of bad feelings when I think about this time in my life. But essentially, I learned, because I came in with all this CocoaPods experience, I ended up being the person that had to solve all these transitive dependency issues back when there was no documentation on how to solve these transitive dependency issues. So I learned this new tool set, and it made me a little more marketable when I was applying for jobs later on in life, and that open source enabled that. One other thing I learned how to do is deal with continuous integration. So for a couple years of my life after working at the agency that built those Ducati and Porsche apps, I worked by myself. And I didn't know anything about testing or continuous integration, but I respected a lot of people online and on Twitter, and I followed them, and I started seeing Travis CI and CI pop up everywhere, and I learned about what CI was, why I should write tests, what TDD is, what BDD is, started implementing it for some of my projects, learned what YAML files were. In my previous career as doing physics, I wrote a bunch of shell scripts, so I got to write pre and post install shell scripts as well. So I got to break out of the iOS Objective-C frame of mind and started to do more testing. And at the end of the day, I think, we now, and this, I can't take any real credit for this, my coworker can take credit for this, but we do nothing but test everything at this point in time. And knowing what it does and what it exists, because you can't imagine how many people apply to work at companies that have no idea what testing is, or they don't practice it. Doing this in open source has enabled me to do, has encouraged me, I don't always do it, but has encouraged me to actually do this in my day job too. The next thing I learned is internationalization and localization. So internationalization is the ability to make your app work in other locales, with other cultures and other, in other parts of the world. Localization is the actual implementation of said internationalization. So it's actually adding the strings and whatever, right to left, left to right, outputting of data depending on what locale you're in. And so over time, as Harpy and Siren grew, a lot of people started opening up pull requests saying, hey, your app is great, but my user base doesn't speak or read English. I would love to present this alert in Chinese or in Portuguese. So I started getting a bunch of these pull requests, and at the end of the day, I now support 40 languages, including English. I support 2 flavors of Chinese, 3 flavors of, I think, Danish. There's some language up there in Western Europe where I did not know that there were 3 flavors of said language. So I learned about NS localized strings, I learned about custom bundles, I learned how to write tests, localization tests. Each of these libraries now have like 200 tests because of that. And then I also learned how to override iOS system level localization. So an example would be, I'm Russian, I live in a community in Maryland where there's a lot of Russian people, and let's say I wanted to build an app, and the user base happened to all have iPhones, and they all happen to not know how to change their default setting to Russian on the phone just because they didn't know how to do that. It's not something that's easily taught. They still have an English phone, but I know that they usually will understand better if things are done in Russian. So if I wanted to present an alert to them in an app that I build for them, then what I would do is I would essentially just force the system level to go. I learned that there's a way you can force the localization to actually force another locale if you want. I learned this in the process. And the most important lesson I learned is how to be a maintainer versus a consumer, right? So I rarely actually use Harpy and Siren. I maybe use it like 6 times in my life. But I've had enough people actually use this project that they're the ones driving the feature set and helping me fix bugs. All I do is convert the code base from Swift 2 to 3 to 4. Sometimes as I learn new things, I will update the code base. So for Swift 4, there's an API request that I make where I'm now using decodable because I know I can. I didn't know I could, So I changed the model around, I changed the structs around. So I just maintain the project at this point, and I test it once in a blue moon to make sure it works. But when something breaks, I find out. I get emails and tweets and LinkedIn messages and nasty other messages. And that whole nasty thing kind of comes down to this. being an open source developer is a job, right? It's a thankless job, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding because you are helping other people. I can tell you the best feeling I got was when the first person ever used my project came in and said, hey, this is awesome, thanks for making it. I can also say that it's the worst feeling I ever got where people are yelling at me in other languages saying, this doesn't work, it's crashing my app, I'm getting 1-star ratings, the App Store rejected me, which is not my fault. All these other things. But then I, as a maintainer, have to keep some professionalism and actually start fixing these problems. Because that's the type of person I am. I want to help people even if they don't like me because I want them to continue using my software, even though I'm not getting paid for it. I'm weird that way. So anyway, this is lesson number 5. So I know I spent a good chunk of the talk, but I assure you I want to teach you how to contribute to open source really quickly. Contributing to Swift. Like I said, I contributed to Swift. I added the implementation for a function that existed in Objective-C on a testing function. It's called xct assert no throw. It didn't exist in Swift, so I added the implementation because I had an extension that we used at the post that added that functionality. And I got sick of having to do that, and I figured this should exist, and then I got it into Swift 3.1 right before the deadline. So the way I found, first I looked for that function, and I found out that function had this ns unimplemented in it. This essentially is code word for saying, we want this, but we haven't implemented it yet. So if you ever want to find out how to implement something in Swift, one way to do is search their core libs or Swift for ns unimplemented. The other thing you can do is search for fix me unsupported. It means the same thing. And then if you want to find something that is already a known bug or a missing feature, go to bugs.swift.org, which is a public Jira board that the Swift core team maintains, and look for filter for the label starter bug for issues that are open. These are already pre-vetted issues by the Swift core team that they want implemented at some point in time that they're not actually doing themselves. So if you want to contribute to Swift today, just do one of these 3 things. And there's a talk later on today downstairs, I think, about actually contributing to Swift right after this talk. That probably will go into more details. So if you want to contribute to an established project, look at issues posted by the maintainer. So Ryan Nystrom, he's an engineer at Instagram, has built a really cool notifications library around GitHub. So it'll just notify you when you have a PR or an issue or something tagged with your name on an iOS app. And he has a bunch of features that he wants to add. So this is just a snapshot from, I don't know, a few weeks ago, where he says these are things that are on his wish list, these are features that he wants, this is a known bug, and he'll allow anyone in the community to come in and fix it. So if you want to contribute to an established project, go for it. If you want to contribute to another established project, you can also look at other labels, like starter, task, help, feature, and bug. And if you want to contribute today, I have an open PR on SwiftLink that I have not been able to finish. What it does is it adds an unhandled throw rule. So in other words, it'll throw a warning whenever a function marked with throw doesn't actually throw. So the implementation I built, they don't like, which is fine. It was very slow because it used regex, and they have a better alternative. They explained to me how they want to do it, but they don't want to do it themselves, and I haven't had time. So if anyone in here wants to contribute to open source, you can start right here. I'm literally giving this to you on a silver platter with already like a half-built solution. So SwiftLint 1315. And then you can create your own project. And this, like nothing in life is easy, and perception is key. These are 2 keywords here, about 2 terms you want to take back. You have to have others perceive that your project is worthwhile. So how do you do that? You add a README. The README has a lot of documentation, sample code, and installation instructions. You have to document every public line of public code or public API. So you write, what's it called? Not just say, hey, this function does X. You'll write, this function does X, returns Y, takes in these parameters. This is the warning, might be deprecated, yada, yada, yada. You have to spend the line using SwiftDoc to document it. Then you document private code as necessary as well. Because if you want someone to actually contribute, they have to understand how everything works under the hood. So leave documentation where code isn't self-commenting. Then take that documentation, run Jazzy over it, and that'll create a static HTML document on GitHub. Like it'll be like yourproject.github.io, and it'll create all of your public APIs will be documented in like the old Apple doc format or the old Apple doc websites. Then hook up add tests, add continuous integration, Travis CI, and Buddy Build give open source projects free CI. Then add a vision document if you want that says the overall vision, and then take that vision document and split it up into issues with features and labels and tasks and so on that other people can come in and use your project. A lot of setup work, but if you want this project to succeed, you have to do pretty much everything listed here. And then you have to market your library. You have to go and beg and plead all the newsletter owners and people on Twitter and podcasters and bloggers say, hey, I built this thing that I think is awesome and you should think it's awesome too. So, here's a list of all the people you can contact. Each person on this list has helped me at some point with my libraries. This is how I generate traffic. On Twitter as well, this helps gain a following if you use Swizzling or iOS Dev as keywords. So anyway, this is just one way to, these newsletter owners are very happy to get your support because they make money, right? They have ads, right? But they don't always have content. You're giving them content. Okay? I'm running out of time, so I have to rush through real quick. So I'm sorry. Do you mind if I take like 1 minute over? Okay. Are you okay with that? 'Cause I know you're speaking next. All right, cool. Thanks. All right, so maintenance tips and tricks. Issue templates. So this is a GitHub specific issue. You can have at the top level directory of your repository, you can have a GitHub hidden folder, and in there you have an issue template markdown file. And what happens is when someone tries to add a new issue, it'll populate the issue window saying, hey, you might be here to post a very common issue. Here are the common issues here's the fix, here's why I won't fix it. Please don't add this issue again, I will just close it. Right? A way to automate this is add a bot, but I haven't figured out how to add a bot yet. That's next on my list. But I also don't get 100 issues a day. But this helps dissuade people from posting the same issue over and over again. Then pull requests versus issues. There's a topic online about turning off issues in favor of pull requests. In other words, people can't post an issue unless they actually know how to fork your library, they've read the manual, they've tried to fix the bug or add a new feature themselves. So they actually care enough to take the effort to do it themselves. So I don't believe in this. I believe in helping everyone, even if it takes a little more time. But there are people who are saying, hey, our project is too big. If you want to help, you have to contribute. So this is one way of keeping your sanity. I have something known as the 5-day rule. So it's a weekday rule, so 5 work days. So if someone opens an issue or pull request, and then I comment on it saying, hey, you need to fix this, or you need to augment this to fit with the standards of the project, if they don't follow up or change the project after 5 days, I close it because it's out of sight, it's out of mind. I don't want to think about it. Maybe they'll resurrect it later on, maybe not. If they don't, I don't care because they don't care. End of story. And then network of trust. Linus Torvalds, essentially, he's the creator of Linux and Git, and he maintains the Linux kernel right now. Essentially what he says here is you can't be the person that runs the project, especially at scale. You will be a choke point. You need to share, you need to trust other people. And there is this developer named Aaron Brager. Some of you may know him. I have never met him. I have never spoken to him. I've just tweeted with him and emailed with him online. He helps me maintain Siren because he wants to. And he helps whenever I don't respond to an issue in 24 hours, he'll jump in. He doesn't gain any benefits from it except that he wants this project to excel and succeed. So he gets credit for the development of this project as well. He has administrative rights to the project. He can nuke it if he wants. He can update it. But we have this understanding where he helps out with issues, PRs, and new features, but he'll let me do all the administrative stuff. And it's been working really well for 2.5 years. And deprecating a project. So there's 2 ways to deprecate a project. First, you can do what Facebook did with 320, which is essentially remove the source code from the top level directory and and just say, hey, update the README saying, hey, this is this project is no longer maintained, but check out the specific commit if you want the last working version. Or you can do what Jesse Squires did with JSQ Messages View Controller and just give it back to the community and let the community develop a Swift implementation. Well, that's what he's doing with his drop-in iMessage replacement software. So it's called JSQ Messages View Controller. Now it's called MessageKit. It's being developed by 100 engineers in the community. So last few words of advice. So I like to read a lot of self-improvement books. One of the books I read recently was Power of Broke, which is by Damon John, one of the sharks of Shark Tank. He owns Fubu. So Broke Power Principle number 4 is one of the principles at the end of the book. So he says, understand that you will be rewarded for solving other people's problems or filling holes in the marketplace, just as you will be rewarded for helping others reach their desired objectives. In other words, if you can figure out how to do something better, faster, easier, and more efficient than anybody else, if you make somebody else's life a little smoother in the bargain, you're always way ahead of the game. What's the point here? He does this with respect to putting a product out to market. In this case, if you put something out to market that is free, you will still get rewarded in spades. I'm not going to go into the details of what happens, but my life has changed drastically by putting stuff out there. I'm on the stage for this reason. I've been on podcasts for that reason. I've gotten job offers for that reason, and so on. I didn't get direct monetary rewards. I got indirect rewards from helping the community and spending a lot of my free time doing that. This takes me to my last slide, I promise. This is my favorite XKCD comic, very, very relevant. And that comic is, never have I felt so close to another soul and yet so helplessly alone as when I Google an error and there's one result, a thread by someone with the same problem, and no answer, last posted to in 2003. Where were you, Deprecating 9? What did you see? If you ever find yourself in this situation in the future, post a solution if you figure it out, or make a solution, or if you can't post to that thread because it's locked due to time, make a new thread with the exact same title, post it, so when someone in another 15 years, God bless their soul, has this problem, make sure that they don't have to go through the same hoopla that you did. Thank you.